Well, ladies and gentlemen, I threatened that I would start exactly on time, and we're already about 1 minute late, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm happy to introduce to you Alexander Veit, who is a research assistant at the Royal Danish Defence College. He's going to talk about Danish strategy in the Arctic, and as I understand, focus on some of the complications caused by the existence of Greenland, and I suppose also the Faroe Islands. So we look forward to this, and Alexander, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. So, I'll just start talking, and those who aren't here yet. Okay, first of all, the reason why this presentation is called Who Gets to Do What is because I'm here to talk about Danish strategy in the Arctic, but you can't really talk about Danish strategy, Danish foreign policy in the Arctic without understanding that Denmark is only an Arctic state by virtue of Greenland being a member of, or being a part of the Danish kingdom. So, the point of this presentation is really that when we talk about Danish foreign policy in the Arctic, we need to understand the relationship between Denmark and Greenland and how that affects Danish foreign policy in the Arctic. And my point is that the notion of sovereignty as an either-or concept is not really adequate to cover the relationship between Denmark and Greenland. So first, an overview. I'd like to start out by talking about the historical evolution of Greenland's self-government. Just talk briefly about 3 years, 1953, 79, and 2009. And after that, I'll talk about the current constitutional relationship between Denmark and Greenland and the potential sources of controversy. And finally, I'll talk about 2 possible future scenarios, one in which Greenland remains within the Danish kingdom, and one in which Greenland chooses to pursue full independence. Okay, so first up, in 1953, Greenland went from being a Danish colony to being a formal Danish county with representation in the Danish parliament. And this happened when the Danish constitution was revised in 1953. Now, the interesting thing from our point of view here is that the phrasing in the constitution regarding the relationship between Denmark and Greenland is surprisingly vague. But this means, and by vague I mean that there's only a sort of there's an implicit understanding that Denmark is a unitary state and that any delegation of power to Greenland, for example, has to happen within the framework of that constitution. But this means that this vague phrasing has also allowed sort of various interpretations as to how much devolution of power is actually possible within the Danish constitution. And we saw this for the first time in 1979, when Greenland got their Home Rule Agreement, and the backdrop to this was the election in 1973 when Denmark was, they voted on membership of the European Community. And in 1973 there was a clear majority in Greenland who were against membership of the European Community, but they were overruled in the overall national election result. So this meant that Greenland suddenly found themselves subject to legislation regarding fisheries, which is a principal component of Greenland economy, which was not just, this regulation was not just decided in Copenhagen, but even further away in Brussels. So this definitely created a momentum in Greenland for increasing autonomy. And they were granted this with the Home Rule Agreement in 1979. Greenland got its own government and its own parliament, legislative and executive power. And a list of areas, a list of administrative areas was made, and it was the idea was that these areas were to be transferred from Danish authorities to Greenlandic authorities. But it's very important to point out that at this point in time there was a clear understanding in Denmark that some administrative areas, such as justice system, foreign and defense policy, monetary affairs, and so on, could not be transferred if Danish sovereignty, the idea of Danish sovereignty, was to be upheld. However, this changed. So when we moved to 2009, and this is the current self-government agreement, it's difficult not to see this as a clear step towards full autonomy for Greenland. First of all, Greenland has now both legislative and executive and judicial power within the fields of responsibility that have been transferred. Second of all, previously Greenland did not have its own foreign policy. That was decided in Copenhagen. But now Greenland has the ability to enter international agreements in areas solely concerning Greenland. The problems inherent in this, I'll return to that. And perhaps the best example of the autonomy envisioned in this self-government agreement is paragraph 21, where it says, decision regarding Greenland's independence shall be taken by the people of Greenland. So there it is, black letters on white paper. If Greenland wants to become independent, they have the possibility to become independent. It's their choice, basically. So this creates a peculiar situation where Greenland is only under Danish sovereignty as long as Greenland chooses to be. So now we move into the current situation and controversies. So, for the time being, Greenland chooses to be under Danish sovereignty. But this also means that there are still some exceptions where Greenland cannot sort of decide on its own. It has to follow the lead from Copenhagen. And here we see the principal exceptions are foreign policy, defense policy, and security policy. And the problem here, or the sort of controversy, is that there is no preliminary definition as to how to distinguish between what's a foreign policy issue and what's not a foreign policy issue, what's a security issue and what's not a security issue. So this means that this has to be decided on a case-by-case basis. And as of right now, there is no agreement other than Denmark and Greenland having agreed to disagree as to make these distinctions. And a primary example of this is, if we go to the last one here, uranium. The mineral resource area was transferred to Greenland's authorities in 2010. So Greenland's authorities says that uranium and extraction of uranium, that's our responsibility, okay? But Denmark says that because of the peculiar nature of uranium and the conventions that Denmark has ratified, the non-proliferation treaty and so on, uranium is actually a security issue and thus the responsibility of the Danish authorities. And it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, especially with the Greenland's election coming up on the 28th of November. Because as of right now, there's no one knows what the outcome of this will be. So this is a very clear source of controversy. And as I mentioned, Greenland can now have its own foreign policy as long as it's only in areas that solely concerns Greenland. But the problem is that virtually any activity on Greenland is likely to be covered by one or more of the numerous international conventions that Denmark has ratified. And because Greenland is not a real state, yet at least, Denmark remains the principal legal subject under international law, which means that we're responsible if any of these international treaties are breached, even if it happens on Greenland's territory. Okay. So, with these sources of controversy, does this mean that Greenland will choose to become independent? Probably not. Because if we look at the first scenario that I'm going to talk about, which is unity of the realm, meaning that Greenland will remain within the Danish kingdom. And this is the official strategy, which was published in 2011 by the Danish government, and it's made in cooperation with the Faroe Islands and Greenland. And the basic premise of this is that both Greenland and the Faroe Islands will remain within the Danish kingdom, and that the current sort of division of responsibilities will remain the same. So this is the official premise for the official strategy of the Arctic. And as you can see, because I've written it down, it's basically about international cooperation and the rule of international law in the Arctic, maritime security cooperation, responsible exploitation of natural resources with respect for the indigenous people. This strategy could have been written by Greenland itself. And this is because Denmark has to accommodate Greenland's interests, Greenland's needs. If Denmark fails to accommodate Greenland, then this risks pushing Greenland towards premature independence. And Denmark does not want this because if we look at scenario number 2, an independent Greenland, there's one primary restraint, and that's the economy. The annual Danish block grant, the grant that goes from Denmark to Greenland each year, currently makes up about 30% of Greenland's GDP. And second of all, any wishes for independence in Greenland hinges on the ability to exploit the natural resources in Greenland, which seemed very promising a few years ago, but the process is not speeding up. On the contrary, it's slowing down, actually. For example, the oil price at the moment is quite low, but in order for oil extraction to be profitable in the Arctic, the oil price has to go up, and it has to remain up high for several years. Otherwise, no one's going to want to extract oil in the Arctic. It simply won't be profitable. So, if independence is rushed through, Greenland will not be able to uphold the same living standards that they have now. And closely related to the financial problem is, of course, the question of defense capability. Right now, the Danish Defense Forces, the Danish Defense, is displaying sovereignty on Greenland's territory. And doing this requires military manpower and technology. If Greenland were to take over this responsibility from Denmark, it would probably mean that Greenland would have to introduce conscription in order to secure the necessary manpower. And if Greenland was to show a defense capability on par with the capability that Denmark is displaying right now, Greenland would have to spend at least 4% of their GDP. Considering what I just talked to you about regarding the economic situation in Greenland, this is simply not realistic. And seeing as Greenland, an independent Greenland, will not be able to display this defense or this sovereignty, an independent Greenland will result in a power vacuum in the Arctic, which is not in Greenland's interest, it's not in Denmark's interest, and is not in the interest of the Arctic region. So, to conclude, my point is that when we talk about Danish foreign policy in the Arctic, we have to understand that Greenland and Denmark actually, to the outside world, we're one actor, but in reality we're two actors. And we have to balance the interests of Greenland and Denmark. Greenland's overriding concern, or Greenland's overriding interest, is financial foundation for independence. But Denmark's overriding concern, Denmark's overriding interest, is to avoid premature independence, and this is done by strengthening the Danish realm as a whole, and thus avoiding a power vacuum in the Arctic. So, are these two goals irreconcilable? It seems that Denmark wants Greenland to remain in the kingdom, but we have to support Greenland on the path that may lead to independence. Actually, obviously, it's difficult to answer this question, but I believe that even if we look at the official strategy, like I mentioned, it's aimed at providing international cooperation, lessen political tension, creating more maritime security, and so on. It's all about creating an environment which is conducive to attracting foreign investment, which is so important to Greenland. And I believe that if this can be done, and if Greenland can sort of reform its economy to an extent that means that it no longer needs the block grant from Denmark, I don't think that this necessarily will result in Greenland seeking independence. Because actually, if Greenland is able to get by on its own without the block grant, this also means that the very last bit of hierarchy, the very last bit of sort of inferiority, maybe the last bit of colonizer versus colonized, will be removed from the relationship between Denmark and Greenland. And this will mean, or this could mean, that we will see an even stronger cooperation between two partners, which would now be fully equal. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you for keeping exceptionally well within the time. We can now move on to Finland, where our speaker is Dr. Lassi Heinonen. the professor of Arctic politics at the University of Lapland, but also a great leader in international academic and research cooperation on the Arctic, which means that he is also a very important partner of major universities in Iceland, at Akureyri and also here at the University of Iceland. And he is going to talk about some of the complexities of Finland's position when it tries to define itself as an Arctic nation, and possible complications in the different goals that it sets for itself. So, Lassi, you're always very welcome in Iceland, and you have now the floor.
Thank you so much, Alison. It's my pleasure to be here, and I really would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. It seems to be that Finland is the first of the leftovers after the 5 littoral states here. So it's a good position to lead this club, which is not exclusive club, unlike the others so far. Well, I mean, I said this because this describes rather well the position where Finland finds itself, and it's not only about geography. So Finland is a landlocked country in the Arctic. I was thinking this my presentation how to present, what to emphasize, and then I decided to have some kind of combination of official foreign policy, history, self-identification, image building, and analysis, and some personal, maybe fishful thinking, but some personal thoughts. Those who know me know that I like maps. I like read maps. And it's so often so good. And here I would like to ask you to look Finland on the map. On the map of the Arctic region. So Finland is there, very close, but as I said earlier, a bit far away when it comes to the real Arctic, if we use that traditional definition of the Arctic. The Arctic is all about the Arctic Ocean. But of course, fortunately, everything is not only based on geography and not only based on classical geopolitics. I would like to take some sort of examples of image building or self-identification of Finland. The first is coming from the Cold War period, when Finland was in between the East and the West. Finland was non-aligned, even neutral, but had good relations with the Soviet Union. And someone started to call it Finlandization. Well, I mean, Finlandization is actually, however, also a perception of a clever strategy or policy. And I think that now we can, or most of experts at least agree that it was clever policy what Finland had during the Cold War. But however, in a way, Finland didn't have any chance to self-identify itself as a northern country, because Finland was in between. And it's so often there is this wrong understanding or misunderstanding that Finland was all the time clinging toward the Soviet Union. Well, at the same time, Finland created good relations with the West, particularly with Western unions dealing with economy. So Finland did the both. And it's one wisdom. I mean, you cannot understand the identity of Finland without understanding that the both sides have played important role there, the West and the East. Then the second period or example is from the early 1990s, after the end of the Cold War, or should I say, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And that was a big, big surprise for the Finnish political and economic elite, or elites. They didn't expect that to happen, at least not that fast. And they didn't want that to happen, because it was very beneficial to have this trade with the Soviet Union. No competition. I mean, for the next 5 years, what was the deal? I mean, all that stuff you could export to the Soviet Union. That's why the Finnish companies were not in so good shape after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But then the political elite of Finland, much supported by the economic business elite, was inspired by geopolitical imagination to remap Finland as a part of Central Europe, next to Germany, in the northern side of Germany. And indeed that happened when Finland joined the European Union, and not only the European Union, but also the Euro area, European Monetary Union, which was a big surprise to most of the people when they voted pro to join the European Union. They thought that they voted only for pro that, but the political elite, supported by the economic elite, was interpreting that actually you voted also pro European Monetary Union, and then we were there. People were not so happy to have euro instead of the Finnish currency, Finnish mark, which Finland got, by the way, in 1860s when we were part of the Russian Empire. So we got our own currency at the time, and then we lost it when we had so much independence. And people didn't like that, and people still remember that. Okay, then the third example is coming from the early 2010s, when Finland defined literally itself as an Arctic country, an Arctic nation. And in the first Finnish Arctic strategy 2010, this was first time officially. Believe me or not, first time Finland defined or redefined itself as an Arctic nation. And still there is this kind of thinking that we have to convince the others that Finland is, if you read this, an Arctic state, an Arctic country, natural actor in the region, an active Arctic nation. The Swedes used to say torta po torta. This is a little bit like that. I mean, even 2 times is enough, or even 1 is enough, but 3 times. And that is rather much coming from the new strategies 2013. And I only took this slide to show that you can compare how the other Arctic states have redefined themselves as northern country state. I think that here Finland is very much like the USA, first time defining itself as an Arctic nation. I will skip this only very briefly, so that this is not a family Christmas tree, and there are only 4 substantial sectors. But however, even there in the 2004-10 strategy, there is no priority. I mean, it's up to you how you interpret that. And my interpretation is that the first priority is economic activities. Although fragile Arctic nature is put the first. And when we take the 2013 strategy, then there are these 4 different things. experts, and then there is a principle of sustainable development. But however, it's not that clear. It's not real priority yet, although the list is short. Okay, so implementation. If you would like to see, does this mean something? Well, maybe the 2013 strategy is more ambitious, because there are mentioned that, yeah, the idea is to implement this, but there is no budget line. So it's not clear at all, is it going to be implemented, and if so, when, and meaning what. So let's leave it for a while, because what I said earlier, that in the Cold War period, Finland was in between. So Finland didn't have really time to remap itself as a northern state. That's why I would like to have to mention some more fundamental issues, because more important is what is under surface, things which do not change so easily or fast. And here, I mean, Finland is, and this was already before the Cold War, it was before the Second World War, Finland was a Nordic country. So the Nordic region, Norden, or Pohjola in Finnish, that is the first international context or environment where Finland was acting as an independent state. So it's very, very important there. And that is there. And then remote northern, but not Arctic, subarctic. I mean, people really, most of the Finns don't really think that yes, Finland is part of Arctic, but it's, yeah, subarctic, yeah, like Lapland, the northernmost county. And there is this in between the East and West, historically, geoculturally, it has played important role and still plays. And in a way, this has been described very well by a famous Finnish author, Väinö Linna. The name of his most important book is Here Under the North Star. And this is something what I mean, all the Finns, yes, exactly. This is the best way to describe where Finland does stand. It's very emotional. But I mean, this is nothing about the Arctic. The North, I mean, how many countries are under the North Star? I mean, it's up to your imagination. And then there are few other things what are describing very much like that it's not only one nation. There are the Finns, yes, but there are the Sami, there are the Karelians. So this is something like which you can have that understanding by the Finnish epic, Finnish Karelian epic Kalevala. It's not all about the Finns. No, it's relations between two polities, Kalevala and the North. And I mean, this is something which is another way to describe where does Finland stand here. Okay, then if we are putting this together and thinking the three trends what I mentioned, however, Finland has had de facto northern dimension there. And it has been a combination, or was a combination of many things. Like, did you know that in Finland you had the first road to the Arctic Ocean, which was open already before the Second World War for tourism. So tourism in the north or in the subarctic, that is part of that. But then you have like research, Arctic research. Then you have Finland as a forerunner for Nordic nuclear-free zone for peace, and so on. And then the last but not least, the Finnish initiative for the Arctic environmental protection strategy. And Finland looked very carefully the Gorbachev speech in Murmansk and took one of the 6 initiatives and then was launching that to the rest of the Arctic states. And what about international cooperation for the Arctic environmental protection? And indeed, that's happened, was signed 1991. And so my point here is that in the new context, which I have tried to describe, that the Arctic is not only globalized, but the globalized Arctic will impact the rest of the world. So we are there already. It's already happening. And now Finland going back to the roots and taking the real best parts of that initiative and concentrating on environmental protection and sustainable development would be the way to go further when Finland, for example, will chair the Arctic Council 2017, 2019, and in 2017 there will be 100 years anniversary of the independence of Finland. So that would be a very natural way to manifest this niche for environmental protection. But I'm afraid that here we have this contradiction, that the political elite, the economic elite, they would like to emphasize and continue economic activities, even dealing with oil and gas drilling, although Finland is a landlocked Arctic state. When we could do much better, and we could do what is so natural for Finland, and think about our position and our capability, expertise for environmental protection. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lassi, for many things, but also for ending with this tension between economic development and the environment, on which there will in fact be a whole separate panel tomorrow afternoon. But I'm glad that we now come to the home country, Iceland, and Silja Bára Ómarsdóttir is an adjunct in the Faculty of Political Science at the University of Iceland, like myself, and she will be talking about what kind of claims Iceland makes in Arctic affairs, but also very correctly, I think, questioning the implementation and what can actually be done.
Thank you, Alison. Am I speaking into the microphone? It's not set for people my size. Yeah, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to speak here today. Kristen's going to fix that. Thank you. I'm a newcomer to the Arctic in an academic sense. I've been studying Icelandic foreign and security policy. And it's in that context that I'm looking at these questions of what Iceland is doing in the Arctic. And the title of my talk I actually got from this this phrase that people use often incorrectly: staking a claim or claiming a stake. The question that I wanted to sort of bring up with that is Iceland approaching the Arctic in a way that it is trying to take a share or participate in everything, or is it approaching it more in trying to find a niche where it can be influential in a particular issue? So is it marking off a topic where it is addressing or promoting or generating discussion or driving the discussion on a particular issue? And that is, of course, something that my colleagues Alison and others at the university have been talking about. What is it that small states do? And small states tend to be affected by events rather than affect them. And I think that would be something that Icelandic policy would benefit from, is to realize and sort of take stock of how is it that we can respond to events, rather than thinking very much that we can create them or lead them. And I think that in order to sort of get to the Arctic, I want to go back a little bit and talk about Icelandic foreign policy. Of course, I don't know exactly how much the audience is informed or. I think Lasse was the only one who actually had the microphone the right height for him. But I want to go back a little bit and talk about Icelandic foreign policy in general, and how Iceland has been affected by events. Should I put this on?
It's fine.
How Iceland has been affected, and how it has used the structures of the international system to get what it wants. But it has done that in a fairly unique way, in that it has entered multilateral agreements, but tried to find bilateral protections within those multilateral agreements. The special relationship with the United States is, of course, a perfect example. Within the structure of NATO, Iceland had a special relationship with a protector, somebody that provided shelter, as my colleague Baldur Thorhalsson has studied extensively, somebody that made the decisions, analyzed the policy, made the proposals. Iceland did not have to actually study the international system very much, but was able to rely on guidance and responses from others. When then the United States decides to shut down its military base here in Iceland in 2006, it became very clear that Iceland had not listened to all of the advice and guidelines that it had, suggestions that it had been receiving. For instance, that Iceland should have started thinking about what kind of policy it wanted to implement. So it let international events affect the country. And it took us a while to realize and to get started, to start to think about what it was that we wanted to do. And for a little while, we made some efforts at making our own decisions. We looked at options. We discovered that there were ways of promoting issues that we were interested in, stepping into multilateral efforts, looked at an application and applied to become members of the European Union. And in this sense, sort of started to generate discussion within Iceland about what it was that we wanted. This included, at the same time as these events are going on, we also started to work on security issues. There was a risk assessment conducted here from 2007 until 2009, and that resulted in a proposal for a national security policy being sent to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs only earlier this year. The years are starting to run together. But in all of this, we are still sort of, we seem to have been get caught up in very often that we want to be special. We look at multilateral agreements and we say, but we're different. This doesn't fit us. We need special consideration. We need a little bit different, the organizations, the structures need to accommodate us because of our uniqueness. There's an exceptionalism that we find in most of our policies. And I think Lasse actually brought this up. The way that Iceland frames its Arctic identity, the only country entirely within the Arctic region, even though we're not a coastal state, we still try to frame this as, this is how we are unique, and this is how we are different from all the rest of you. And we like it. We want to be, because that has served us well. We have been able to say to powers, larger powers, that were special during the Cold War, when the Cod Wars were at their height. The dominant discourse in Iceland is that it's the heroic action of the coast guards that led to the expansion of our exclusive economic zone. The more detailed historical readings of those events are that it was pressure from the United States that needed Iceland to be a military base available. So it's a way of playing power against power to serve our needs that has sort of brought us to where we are. And thinking about these kinds of, how we do these kinds of, how we approach these kinds of decisions, how we approach difficult negotiations, brings us sort of back to what it is that we want to do with the Arctic. How are we looking at the Arctic as a forum for our policies, for what it is that we want, and how, or are we looking at it as a forum for multilateral for our participation in multilateral fora, where we can contribute to a positive development. And in 2011, the Icelandic Parliament passed a resolution setting Iceland's Arctic policy, and it's available in English, so hopefully most of you have seen that. And looking at it, I think it's interesting to put it into this context of the multilateral versus the bilateral, and how we are trying to get, what it is that we're trying to do. If we look at the focus on what comes out of this, Iceland accepts and promotes the Arctic Council as the most important forum on the issue of the Arctic. Well and good. What does that mean for Iceland? Well, it means that we need to be accepted as a coastal state. So the message is not just that the Arctic Council is good, and it's important to be there. It's important that we are in there, and that the focus is very much on the acknowledgement of Iceland as one of the core states, that we cannot be excluded. So that's why the multilateral issue is important. The focus very much on the North Atlantic being considered to belong to the Arctic region. Linking the law of the sea to questions of the Arctic. As Mike mentioned earlier, not something that the United States is interested in. So we want to use the structures that have benefited us. The law of the sea, of course, was very useful for us in the Cod Wars, for example. We were able to use structural changes to benefit us. So these kinds of issues are okay. Multilateralism is okay when it benefits us, but the focus very quickly shifts when something else is at stake. So regional cooperation, especially in the West Nordic with Denmark, with Greenland and the Faroes, becomes more important, and that's of course where Iceland has different unique interests to share. The rights of indigenous peoples fits very well with emphases that Iceland has in human rights and in gender equality, working on the rights of minority groups and other foreign policy areas. But if you look at it a little bit closer, the emphasis is actually on where the indigenous peoples are excluded, Iceland is also excluded. So it's sort of trying to dovetail the interests of other groups with Iceland's interests. And then the questions of, I think, of climate change, these are actually maybe a little bit different framework than what I'm addressing. But I think it's there's an element of the Christmas tree here that was mentioned earlier. There's 12 points that are mentioned, so there's actually quite a lot of points for a small country to address in this policy. And thinking about human-induced climate change, how can Iceland strive to minimize the effects of climate change when it is actually wanting to promote trade relations with other states in the regions, wanting to emphasize Iceland as a hub for events like this one and bigger ones in the Arctic that generate traffic that may lead to increased traffic of oil tankers and so on that are at risk, and how can we match this interest of protecting the environment with questions of, for example, oil exploration, which the current government is very interested in allowing. So I think what we're actually seeing is, after a very brief intermission of Iceland trying to sort of open up to more multilateral cooperation, we're seeing a return to the traditional Icelandic approach to foreign policy, where we want to use multilateral structures as they can benefit us, but focusing on targeting with strong allies within these multilateral arrangements. I'm out of time, I think, even though I have some more points, but hopefully in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and also for making an advertisement for our work on small states in the university, which is indeed one of the areas where we would like to show some excellence. The last speaker is by no means the least, because the last chairmanship of the Arctic Council was held by Sweden, and there was a very productive ministerial meeting at Kiruna in May last year. So I have pleasure in inviting Ambassador Bosse Hedberg, who is the ambassador of Sweden at Reykjavik, to present his country's approach. If that is at the wrong level, you could just pull it out.
I think I can fit in between Silja and Lasse, I think. Dear organizers and dear moderator, distinguished panel and audience, as the last speaker, I shall try to be as brief and succinct as possible. The range of aspects raised this afternoon is both impressive and wide, and let me therefore focus only on some specific issues of Sweden's policies in the Arctic region. I think both Silja and Lasse tried to elaborate on why Iceland and Finland are Arctic countries. I'm just going to say that Sweden is an Arctic country because 1/5 of this territory is north of the Arctic Circle. We are also an EU member, even though the most northern part of Sweden is inhabited by only 0.3% of our population of 10 million. A full third of our domestic energy comes from that part of the country. Hydroelectric power mostly, and also forestry and mining is important in the north. LKAB's facilities account for iron ore, 90% of iron ore production within the European Union, so it's quite important. And the plant is connected to the world market, as you know, by the Malmbana railway from Sweden running to the Norwegian port of Narvik. Sweden is not only an Arctic country with a certain history, but also, of course, a member of the Arctic Council. Over the past 2 decades, Sweden has been strongly engaged within each of the 4 regional councils in Northern Europe, being the Council of the Baltic Sea States, the Barents Euro-Arctic Council, the Nordic Ministerial Council, and the Arctic Council, and in addition the northern dimension of the European Union. However, the gist of our contribution to the Arctic is the Swedish tradition of Arctic research. At the Arctic Research Center in Abisko, we have collected data that goes back 100 years in time. Another example is the prominent Arctic research platform, the icebreaker Odin, which earlier this year undertook a 3-month-long journey with Russian, American, and Swedish scientists, the Sverus C3 expedition, mainly to study the origins of the Arctic and the changes of climate. And that project involved some 80 scientists from Stockholm and Gothenburg universities in Sweden, the Russian Academy of Science, the International Arctic Research Science Center, and the Rice University of Texas. Of main interest were the links between the climate, the so-called cryosphere, and carbon. And one issue here was to observe the methane trapped in the permafrost at the sea bottom, or flow of carbon in the sea and in the ice. During the Swedish chairmanship of the Arctic Council, we strongly emphasized the fundamental importance of ensuring that the Arctic remains a low-tension area when it comes to national security policies, and also an area in which new activities are based on mutual agreements. This principle was clearly confirmed also by the ministers at the Kiruna meeting in May 2013, within the Vision for the Arctic, which specifies, and I cite, the further development of the Arctic region as a zone of peace and stability is at the heart of our efforts. Let me also take this opportunity to underline the importance that Sweden attaches to the rule of law in general, and of course, as some have mentioned already, to the application of the United Nations Law of the Sea Convention to the Arctic Ocean, where coastal states have the same rights and obligations, of course, as regarding national resources and the protection of the marine environment as coastal states in other parts of the world. One of the most important deliverables of the current Canadian chairmanship of the Arctic Council so far is the creation of the Arctic Economic Council. Further aspects of its future activities need to be sorted out, but Sweden strongly supports and welcomes this result, another task from the Kiruna Declaration, which should allow business-to-business contacts to be established and to facilitate examples and exchanges of knowledge, the development of best practices, and last but not least, to provide for an attractive investment climate. The increased interest in the Arctic Council can be measured by the rising number of observer applications. 7 new members were welcomed at the Kiruna meeting. The EU applied for such status already in 2008. I wish to reiterate our strong support for such a status to be given to the European Union. The EU already possesses competence and technique in such sectors as transport, navigation, fishing and mining. The EU also contributes financially to extensive research in areas relevant for the Arctic. And 3 EU members, Denmark, Finland and Sweden, are also members of the Arctic Council, and 6 other EU members are active observers. At the ministerial meeting in Kiruna, the EU's application was received affirmatively, while a final decision on implementation by consensus was deferred until the EU and Canada had resolved the issue, which you are well aware of, the import of seal skins from traditional Inuit hunting. Since that issue is now resolved, we expect a decision to be made soon in order to finally welcome the European Union as a permanent observer. Let me finally add that we look forward to the incoming chairmanship of the United States of the Arctic Council next spring. The title of Dr. Corrigan's intervention this afternoon, Superpower or Spectator, was intriguing, but is now well explained. With 2 new Arctic policies from the State and the Defense Department and the Department of Defense, plus an ambitious chairmanship program in place, there should be no doubt about the US level of interest and engagement in the 2 years to come. I thank you for your attention, and I regret not being so academic as all the other panel speakers, but I'm just a diplomat, so thank you.